Good afternoon. I see we have a packed audience for the end of the first day. So today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. For those who attended the Network Builders Summit in Madrid not so long ago, we spoke about Telco Cloud as a big opportunity for service providers and the ecosystem alike. And we spoke about Intel's perspective on it. But today we're very, very lucky to have some honoured guests with us that have decided to spend a bit of time answering questions, some that I've prepared and hopefully some that will come from the audience, representing a good spectrum of our ecosystem as well, who are all playing quite a big role in Telco Cloud. And Telco Cloud, as you heard from Lynn this morning, from Intel's perspective, really is around service monetization on the edge of the network. Intel really believes in bringing those cloud economics to the edge of the network, especially to be ready for 5G. This big two-letter acronym that we all hear about, 5G readiness. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? And we're going to touch on that a little bit today. We're also going to touch on maybe the cultural changes that need to happen within the industry to make that shift to cloud a reality, and maybe talk about some of the key technologies that these companies are bringing to the market as well. So, first in line here we have Nick Limo from Canonical, who's the Director of Information and Comms Technologies. Hey Nick.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Here.
Oops.
Next to Nick we have Sanjeev from Ravana from Cisco, who is the Senior Director of Service Provider Business.
Brian.
Good to meet you. I'm going to walk across here. Pradeep Sen from Hewlett Packard Enterprise, CTO of the Network Functions Virtualization Group. Wonderful. And we have Ron Haberman from Nokia, GM of the Cloudband Group, correct? Okay, so I gave a little bit of a prelude into what my first question is going to be. We've talked about the opportunity that Telco Cloud can bring to operators, but maybe starting with Ron. Ron, what's Nokia's perspective on Telco Cloud from an opportunities perspective with operators?
So where do I begin? I think that that's that kind of question we can kind of cover the entire session. Look, the opportunity is massive. If we look at what we've been trying to do in the industry, both in terms of the transformation into cloud use and the ability to bring new services in, I think cloud kind of connects all worlds together. It gets the operator the ability to get new services faster into their network, enable new software in the network, whether it's just an upgrade feature-wise of an existing function or just connecting a new function that would come all together, while creating a new paradigm for how to operate, meaning minimize the time that it takes to actually take that function in. To begin with, getting it much, much closer to the enterprise world, the cloud world with the DevOps type of model. So the key question right now is how do we start, right? I've been coming to these events now for a few years, and we usually start actually with, what is the big picture, what is the big opportunity? But if we learned anything from this past year, is that the actual implementation starts fairly small. And that's how you make real progress. In order to be able to materialize this cloud vision, this big picture of what do we get out of it, we have to start somewhere. And our partners are actually taking those first few steps and putting something in the network to grow with are the ones making the most progress, much more so than the big design plan.
Very good. So, in summary, it's smaller steps to begin with?
Smaller steps, practical learning, right? Converging onto a new operational model that has been a bit left out, right, in my opinion, in the past few years. Once we actually do this, right, what would it actually be like to operate end-to-end? How it will differ, and what new skill sets will have to be placed such that operations can actually operate the network, right? This is a new paradigm for many. It was for Nokia, right? We had to do quite a bit of learning inside to be able to deal with it. This is a make it or break it here.
Very good. So Pradeep, building on from what Ron said there, We need to start from a smaller perspective. Operationalization seems to be a key word. What's Hewlett-Packard Enterprise's perspective on telco cloud, and how are you helping the industry operationalize it?
So, yes, so much of the same things Ron talked about, telco cloud is about achieving the flexibility and agility that service providers need to move into the next generation of networks and the next generation of services, frankly. Our perspective is really it should be service-driven. All of these new technologies we're all enamored with are great, but if you can't get better services, new services, then our efforts are not really successful. So because of that, our perspective is to look at it holistically from top to bottom. So we look at all the way from service operations down to the infrastructure and tackling various problems at each of those levels and seeing how to put it together. And I'd echo what Ron said. This is the year of where we move into reality. The first few years of this journey has been about exploring what this technology or what these approaches are all about. It's been about seeing whether things work or not. And then we moved into a phase where people started asking the hard questions, the operational questions. How do I operate this? How do I put things together? What do I need to do to actually get into my network? Do I need to change my processes? Do I need to change my organizations? And those are the right questions to address right now, because if you don't address those, you will not get this into your network. That's our perspective. We're looking at it as a total transformation of how things are done in carrier networks, how services are provided, and we need to look at it top to bottom, but also factor in how to change processes and organizations as part of this. But I would agree with Ron that just because you're looking at it holistically doesn't mean you start big with a big bang and change everything. No carrier is going to do that. So you need to attack specific problems and try to make the change incremental. And that's why most of our engagements with many customers have been in different aspects of this journey, but making progress in all of them.
Okay. So Sanjeev, from Cisco's perspective, you've been in this business a while as well. What are the key problems do you see with telco cloud being pervasive with comm service providers?
Yeah, I think it's all about, if you start talking about the barriers, we talked about the advantages of speed, efficiency, and growth. It's not that the providers were not looking at speed, efficiency, and growth in the past, but with the new sets of more towards, leveraging new models around DevOps or leveraging going after new aspects of a new cultural shift on the operational methodology, moving away from specific waterfall kind of a model of development and moving towards a DevOps. It's a shift, and I totally agree with my colleagues. It's a transformation, and it's not just a technology transformation. This is a huge shift into the business of all our service provider friends, and that transformation requires them to move with speed and efficiency and go after new areas. And so it's not that all the answers are known. It's not that we have figured out everything, what are the barriers we're going to go and face. But I think the first question should have been, what if they don't do this? And if you get into that mode of what if they do not go towards that shift? What if they do not adopt cloud-based model? Where would these providers be? And how would they compete into their market space? That would also help us move towards the future. So from our perspective, Cisco's perspective, we are very much looking at what Pradeep and Ron mentioned. It's all about notion of service creation. It's all about business outcomes for the providers. It's all thought process of how do we help them achieve those business outcomes while they are transforming, and how can we help them in that journey. It's a journey. It's not that we're going to have this day one and they're going to find all the answers. So we're going to work very closely with them. There are a lot of areas which still needs to be figured out. So
far, I'm hearing it's a marathon, not a sprint. There are key steps that the industry needs to make holistically, and that all three companies are very focused on helping operators move through that transition. So, Nick, from your perspective, you've been in the cloud business for a while, and certainly from an enterprise perspective, you've seen this transformation happen, and your company's been involved in that. What's your perspective on the key cultural changes, or maybe the key adoption factors that need to be taken into account to help accelerate that transformation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what's interesting is I think we all agree this thing is evolving. Technical level, looking at operation. And then what's interesting, at least for me, is seeing now people looking at how to deploy service on this platform that's been built for many years now. And to me, this is really where it's getting interesting, because this is really where operators are going to start making money and start scaling out those services. The interesting part is the technology, from our perspective, the technology that is used in the various fora and those architecture is the same then is consumed from us in the enterprise, or even in the cloud. I think having that common layer over time going to help standardize open source standard API, and basically at that point when you get that common platform, or get this this ecosystem agreement on the technology to use, then you can quickly start evolving much faster and have the ecosystem focus on the real problem, which is deploying services, right? And we see it, which is interesting, we see it in OPNFV, we see it in open source Mano, OpenO now, and OpenCord, where for us, our distribution, our product, our leverage in all those four different communities building this platform, and now looking at basically the services. And what we believe is through our engagement and what we hear from customers, really we're looking at this model-driven approach, where basically not necessarily looking at having the flexibility of deploying a virtual infrastructure with image, but really kind of looking at complex model. That basically really leverage software infrastructure as opposed to system infrastructure integration.
Ron, you had something to add to that?
So maybe a comment. I completely actually agree with the comments. But one thing that kind of touches on your previous question regarding adoption is that we keep referring to it as a platform, but in fact, what I observe is that there are many flavors. Many flavors. Sometimes, even within a particular customer partner of ours, we see multiple directions, different choices, vendors, versions of OpenStack at times, which impacts obviously quite massively the integration effort that needs to take place. Now, add to that the fact that almost nobody builds greenfield completely. There's at least some services that touch the other side of the network, those PNFs. I think it's a major hurdle that we need to deal with. So a little bit more focus, and I'll touch on that actually tomorrow, would help move things forward much faster.
I would just add to it is, I think you referred to system integration, and the previous way of doing system integration was to invite vendors and basically do interrupt testing, and have kind of complex exercise to do those integration. Now with this type of platform, and what we look at is you do it in software. So now you basically integrate application with code and with API, which give you this DevOps kind of foundation that you need to automate more and more, and speed to market, and increase the velocity of what you deploy.
Yeah, so completely agree. It's just that let's not forget that, we talk about the PNFs, but it has always been software, right? Now, integration is integration, right? APIs, it's enough that, there's just a little bit of difference in implementation. It's enough that the process was not completely defined, right, by the standard bodies, which it hasn't. which means that now you need to bring somebody in to massage the software and adjust it. I've been, now personally involved in so many cases where it's just a hair off. It doesn't have to be much, right? It's just a little bit, right? This entire market wants multi-vendor, so there's the additional complexity that we designed into it, right, by choice, to make sure that all the different layers, and there are now many more of them, all interrupt. And yet, the standards are a little bit behind, in my opinion, right? Open source obviously helps quite a bit, so I think it sets the standard, and it helps with the integration. But that is still there. So every time you do a little bit of a tweak, yes, it's software, but at the same time, right, an adapter needs to be created, and a MOP is introduced, right, unfortunately.
Thanks very much for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that I think integration and interoperability now has a new meaning and a new approach with this open source based effort. So while there is, I agree with Ron, there's a lot to do, and there are many flavors, and integration is always hard. But I think this new approach gets us to a way of solving this problem. In the past, we always used to think about an architecture as sort of frozen. Here it is, and I need to build to that. And unless I get everything exactly right, I can't build this architecture. That's different now. The fact is, change is built in. Change is built into this process, and we're saying that plan for change. Don't think your system is going to be stable and it's going to be this forever. It's going to change tomorrow, and it's going to change perhaps the next hour. It's going to be a much more frequent pace of change, which the software industry is used to, and this is something very new for network operators, communication service providers. But adopting this new method allows you to solve a lot of these interoperability problems, because you're tackling problems one by one and building up your system and are ready to change to allow that evolution to happen, which is a little different from how we used to do it before. So yes, there are many challenges ahead, but I believe if we adopt these techniques and adopt these principles, I think there's a way forward.
Yeah, so integration, the classical sense of integration is evolving in itself, I believe. Sanjeev, you and I spoke about 9 months ago in Dublin, and we spoke about how the comm service provider business is evolving, and how the old business models that were in place, where comm service providers were very successful, are beginning to change. What do you believe from a Cisco's perspective, and you've, again, being in the business of offering enterprise services and working with enterprises to really optimize their data centers and networks, what do you believe are the key advantages from a comm service provider perspective versus the classical over-the-top providers that provide these services? And how is Cisco helping close that gap and maybe accelerate the move to that sort of over-the-top model?
Yeah, I think obviously, you would always want to compare communication service provider to over-the-top provider, which is the right thing to do. But if you should also keep in mind the actual end customers of those communication service providers, which could be either enterprises or consumers. From a consumer perspective, obviously, the reason why over-the-top players have been able to derive more value is simply because they've been able to react much faster to what the consumer needs are, whether it is personalization, whether it is, leveraging some of the apps the consumers have been looking for, and that's why there has been a success. It's not that the communication service provider cannot offer that, but it's the ability to move fast enough than the over-the-top players have been one of the reasons why they have not been able to move quicker. On the enterprise side, is the same concept goes, right? If you think about where the shift is happening on the enterprise is moving towards cloud and what they are looking towards. Enterprises do have an option to do it themselves, or they could go to a communication service provider, and it's all about bringing value to their business. If a comm service provider is unable to bring that value to that enterprise, there would be a question that, how those business models would evolve. So I definitely see that the comm service provider has a huge role in this notion towards the digital transformation of an enterprise. We call it digitization, whether we talk about 5G or whether we talk about move towards Internet of Things or Internet of Everything. Enterprises are at the center of that transformation of how they are going to evolve their businesses. And as a comm service provider is actually an enabler towards those kind of services, whether it is hyper mobility, hyper connectivity, hyper value creation on the service-led discussion. That's where the comm service provider has a huge opportunity, as long as they move with speed and efficiency.
Very good. And Pradeep, from your perspective, building on from what Sanjeev had just said there around those business models that are changing, and you've seen it as well over the past period of time, what do you think are the distinct advantages and I suppose the value proposition that a comm service provider would have with a cloud architected business versus an over-the-top provider?
So the advantages are pretty much the traditional advantages a comm service provider always had. It's just how do you utilize that and take advantage, leverage that, and actually use it in your services. The communication service providers have the reach. They reach a large number of customers directly. They either the consumer has a phone connected to their network or a wire connected to their network, or enterprises have wires and phones connected to the network. So the reach is tremendous, and the reach is direct to that end customer. And the other thing is, with the extensive networks they have in place, there's a tremendous amount of information in the network about usage of the network, about those end customers. And so putting these together is a tremendous advantage for the communication service providers, something which other providers cannot meet. The challenge there is, how do I take this information and make it useful for operating my service, offering my service, and make it useful to my end customers? And I think in the past, this has been an issue because everything you do to it in the traditional networks required moving hardware, moving people, making a change. So whenever you had new information which you had to act on, it was a long process to be able to get that information into usable form and places where it needs to be. With the new cloud-based models we're talking about, this should be much easier. And that's really what we're hoping, that the fact that this allows the traditional CSPs to move faster, to move in a more flexible way so that they can change things when things don't work out, for example. That's the advantage of this cloud-based model, but you're leveraging the same advantages you had before.
So Ron, and you've been looking at this in Cloudband for a while. What's your perspective on it?
So maybe just to add, I agree 100%, but maybe to summarize, service providers always had working for them the fact that the simplicity of the connection is there, right? Users were able to create their own overlay VPN since forever, but the simplicity getting it from a service provider in an even more secure way is there. But more importantly, even the performance and the predictability, right, of these services is the key advantages that service providers have. Now, the choice that many users make, not so much on their business decisions, but on their personal ones, is that, well, maybe I will sacrifice some simplicity and even predictability to gain agility, right? I want that service faster, so I will get it, from an over-the-top provider, even though it's no longer very predictable. I don't know how many hops, right, the packet needs to take every time it tries to reach this storage system, and most time of the day it works great, except that sometimes it gets slowed down, and I'm not sure exactly why. The opportunity, right, if we go back to your original question, is to actually combine the two worlds, right? Keep the simplicity, the performance, and the predictability, and connect it with the agility and the ability to bring new services in, such that the end user doesn't have to make this choice. They can get every single new service faster, together with what they grew accustomed to, which is to know exactly how it's going to work and get an end-to-end SLA to it. Again, we just need to pick a service and go.
Need to pick a service. And I think the pervasive service, the word data has come up there a lot. And I think the distinct advantage that an operator has to its enterprise customers is the fact that I can help secure, manage, and control that data. Nick, from an enterprise perspective, enterprise made this shift years ago and continue to make this shift. What's Canonical's perspective on that, on the value of that data that, let's say, an enterprise would have, and what are Canonical doing to help to help assure that enterprise of that data, and that they have manageability on that data and whatnot?
We've been involved with NVIDIA and some other key technology driver for artificial intelligence. And I think basically when you start looking at the scale of this data and how to expose it and distribute it, you look at a completely different paradigm. And basically what become important is to be able to, to build like really massive software infrastructure, not just like, couple 5-6 application, but talking about, the big data, cluster, talking about having operational tools around it to capture the data, the data processing pipeline. So you start looking at really complex model to be able to like really handle that data at scale. And what we learn, like working with enterprise, with developers that build those systems, is really like, a lot of this is replicable, and it's all about shared operation. So basically, when you start having multiple applications connected together, you don't want to have like unique way to operationalize these pieces of software, where basically it become really hard to to find the skill, or to basically like maintain it and continue evolving it. So basically, by abstracting through real operation, those deployment, you have access to you need less scale. Everything is automated. Everything is basically predefined. So there's some work to be done up front to define those architecture and how they integrate. But once you've done it, it's really easy with iteration to make it evolve and basically keep the automation.
So is it less skill, or is it, and it's actually a great segue into my next question, or is it a different sort of skill? Do you believe, maybe Ron, starting with you, do you believe that the industry, that upskilling is an issue in the industry? Do you believe that operators need to reskill their engineers to be more DevOps, for instance, right?
I think different skills for sure. I think DevOps is a topic that we actually haven't even started to scratch the surface on. Okay, so I'll keep that aside, for a second, and I just talk about just the normal process, right? Even pre-DevOps will require new skills. Just the separation of the layers and the ability for operations to allow themselves, right, to not know some of the information, I think is key, right? In many discussions, right, I asked this simple question, right? If there was a potential failure that is being avoided, right, due to software automation, at what level of operations would the information be required, right? In a web scale type of an environment, I would say that if a server failed, right, whatever it may have impacted, had there not been software automation, is not interesting to anybody. Okay, the fact that things moved and got reinstantiated somewhere else doesn't matter, right? The server is gone, right? We'll take it out of service. At some point, we'll come and decide if we even want to do something about it. With operators, it's not always the case. I mean, the what ifs are actually quite important in charting the path of all the automation did, even if it was allowed to run completely automated and did not ask for advice, is critical. DevOps will make things much, much more complicated because now, right, we're starting to talk about situations in which we not only allow automation for things that just run, right? But we also allow for new software to come in, right? Bring new capabilities in and decide how do we allow automation to bring those capabilities into the network, and how do we automate the level of testing to figure out whether it works or not. So co-creation becomes the key issue, and for that, right, for sure we would need quite a lot more work.
So that's co-creation within the ecosystem. Pradeep, from your perspective, upskilling, yes or no?
Yes, definitely, but it's many different kinds of skills, and I think it's more of an attitude than skill per se. It's really allowing yourself to think differently about the network. So those who've been running these networks for a long time, the operations folks, the people who worry about the processes, need to now consider how this softwareization is affecting it. And so what that means is some of the things which were holy tenets in the past have to be challenged. You have to think outside that. A simple question like, well, not simple, but an important question is reliability, right? So traditional network operators think about reliability from top to bottom, and they think about the traditional 5 nines, 6 nines, whatever you want to call it, for the hardware layer. Now they have to think about the same thing. I mean, in the past too, they thought about service reliability, but they've sort of trickled it down to what the equipment needs to be to meet that reliability. But now you have to think very differently. You need service reliability at similar levels, but I don't need the individual piece of hardware or equipment to have that reliability. And Ron gave an example that if a server fails somewhere, if the service is running, who cares? So the server may have 3 nines reliability, but the service has the required reliability. So you need to think differently. So what that means is the processes have to be different on how you achieve this reliability, how you achieve service assurance, how do you find out when things are wrong. If the system will automatically adjust, what do you really need to know about the service? And it's really, so the skills are not necessarily new technologies or new things. It's really thinking differently about the networks.
Okay, so the next question is something that's a bit of something that's on my mind lately, because I talked to a lot of operators. Operators are saying, hey, we want you to develop your application to be cloud native, or we want your application to be cloud ready. Nick, from your perspective, have you seen these requirements coming in, and do you believe it's actually cloud readiness they're looking for, our pure, top to bottom cloud native application?
In the enterprise, you already see a lot of those applications already cloud native, and we learn how to deal with it. And this is what is some case for certain application what is needed to really kind of reach the maximum deployment potential and bring the automation that we've been talking about. I think in telecom the key thing, somehow some of those legacy applications gonna have to become stateless and distributed and basically have shared data. So basically, especially if we start looking at different deployment scenario between the edge and the decentralized cloud, these applications will need to evolve for reaching the potential of cloud to run them. So.
And Sanjeev, from your perspective, cloud native important, cloud readiness important?
Both of them.
Both are important.
Yeah, both are important, and I think it's we haven't talked to a single customer who would say, hey, we would not be interested in cloud native or cloud readiness. Everybody is at a different place within their journey, and they're trying to evaluate various different pieces from that lens. So I think it makes total sense. I just wanted to add one more thing on the skills aspect, because whether you talk about cloud native, cloud ready, there is absolutely a need to evolve the skill set, right? And like Pradeep was saying, 100% agree. It's the network engineers, the way they used to build, operate, manage, assure a specific service, all of those processes are going to change. And how they configure, how they are managing it, how they are assuring a service, those skill set needs to evolve. And it's not that everything what they have learned over the years is going to go away. It's a bridge, and they will be able to bridge between what they had and what they are heading towards. So everybody needs to evolve.
It's an evolution, exactly. If there was one message that you could leave the audience here with today that will help them on their transformational journey, what do you think that should be? And let's start with Sanjeev again, actually.
If I have to give one message, it is that it is a journey for the transformation. Look at it from your individual perspective, from your business transformation aspects, and how that could evolve. Like I said in the beginning, there's no question that you're not going to go and join the journey. I think that jury probably, I haven't seen anybody saying, hey, we're not going to adopt this, or we're not going to automate, or we're not going to go move with speed. I think that question is done. Everybody is going to move towards that. Where would you start? How would you start that journey? Where you are in that? That's the most important thing. And faster you look at it, better it is for you, for your business.
And Nick?
Yes,
What's your key message?
Key message, focus on the business, right? Go after the money, which is the services, and don't over-architect or overthink, this layer architecture, which start with the infrastructure and then the application control and the service. At the end of the day, focus on the service, try often, and maybe you'll fail at the beginning, but
fail fast.
Make it, exactly, and make it sustainable in terms of the right building blocks. So I'd like to think like trying to do the minimum all the time, and then basically grow from there. But make sure you have the right tool. Again, from our perspective, it's model-driven automation and scale, web scale type approach. So.
100% agree. Start with the service. Just be careful. Right? And expand on the technologies that you want to achieve, as opposed to fall into the pitfall of having many of these running in parallel. So start with something very, very concrete, and then be disciplined about growing it.
Sort of echoing all this, but looking at it slightly differently, I'd say think holistically and act specifically. That is, you need to have the big picture in mind as you make these changes and make this transformation. If you lose sight of that, then you're going to go down a rat hole and get stuck there. So always keep the bigger picture in mind. What are you trying to achieve with this new transformation?
So focus on the bigger picture, focus on the problem that you're solving, but laser in then on the thing that brings everything together first. And, try, and if you fail, and then you retry again. And bring that cloud sort of development mentality into your mindset. That's great. Thanks very much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.